Okay, on to our examples. If we start with fractions, we can write those fractions again as a decimal, which sometimes can help us understand how big of a piece we are talking about. If we have the fraction, we learned this yesterday, 8/10, it's like saying that we have 8 out of 10 pieces. So 8/10 can be represented, we write our decimal point, and we are talking about the tenths place. We have 8 pieces out of those 10. So we have our decimal point, and then we simply write 8 in the tenths place. Very easy. If we have 8 out of 100 pieces, we're talking about 8/100ths. We have our decimal point, a 0 as a placeholder in the tenths place, and then an 8 in the hundredths place. 8/100ths. Now moving on to the thousands place, we have 8 out of 1,000 pieces. We say this is 8/1000ths. We have our decimal point. We have a placeholder 0 in the tenths, a placeholder 0 in the hundredths, and then we write our 8 in the thousands place. So this would be 8/1000ths. You can see how our number changes each time. We still have the same digit 8, but it moves across, it moves to the right in the place value. We know that 8 out of 10 pieces would be much bigger than 8 out of 1,000 pieces. So this number is bigger than this number, which is bigger than this number. So I can actually write a greater than sign in between these to represent that. Now, if we want to go from, here we just went from a fraction to a decimal. If we want to go from a decimal to a fraction, we look at the decimal that we have. This one we would say as being 6/100ths, meaning 6 out of 100 pieces. So to figure that out, I double check by looking in the place value that the 6 is in. I write that as my numerator. The digit that we find is always our numerator. And then to figure out what number is in our denominator, I look at the place value it's in. It's not in the tenths, it is in the hundredths, which means that we have 6 out of 100 pieces. Fractions are pretty easy because our denominator will always be 10, 100, 1,000, etc. This number, we have 2 out of 1,000 pieces. I know that because the 2 is in the thousands place. Not in the tenths, not in the hundredths, it's in the thousands. So 2 is my numerator. And then, because we're in the tenths, hundredths, thousands, I write 2 out of 1,000 as my fraction. Now here's a little more complicated one with more than one digit. We have 0.362. We would say 362 thousandths because that's the last place value that's represented. So my numerator is easy. I write 362. And I know that it is out of 1,000 because that is the last place value that we are working in. So doing a number like this is not really all that different than a number like this. We just need to pay attention to where the last digit is according to place value. Now what about a mixed number? What if you get a decimal that looks like this? We have 1.017. If we're going to go from a decimal to a fraction, and I see a decimal that looks like this with a number to the left of the decimal point, that means I will have a mixed number for my fraction. So let's take care of the 1 first. That doesn't have anything to do with what's going on over here. It will not be a part of my fraction. So I can write 1 as a whole. Now I'm going to treat the rest of the numbers to the right of the decimal point in the same way. So I have 0.17, which is 17 thousandths. I look at where the last digit is. So I write 17 as my numerator, and then 1,000 as my denominator. So 1 and 17 thousandths, just like we did on our earlier examples, except this time we have a whole number in front. Now to go from a fraction to a decimal, it's not any harder at all. This 5 is our whole number, so it will be to the left of the decimal point. We have 707 out of 1,000 pieces, which means our last digit, this 7, will end up being in the thousands place. So this is pretty easy. We just write 707 and double check our last digit is in the thousands place. So 5 and 707 thousandths, which turns out to be the same thing. So not too much more complicated. Just make sure you keep that whole number either to the left of your fraction or the left of your decimal point. Now, how do we figure out which decimals or fractions are bigger or smaller compared to another one? So for example, if we were going to go from the least to the greatest, we would look at these decimals. We have 0.001, we have 0.10, and 0.100. Now, when we look at these, we know that this one means that we have 1 out of 1,000 pieces. So think about if you were going to split a pizza up into 1,000 pieces, and you only got one of them. Pretty darn tiny. Now this one, on the other hand, we have 1 out of 100 pieces. So we split a pizza into 100 pieces, you get one of them. Still pretty tiny. This decimal represents 1 out of 10 pieces. So actually we're getting to a normal size of pizza here. This decimal is the biggest compared to this one or this one. This decimal is the smallest, 1 out of 1,000. So if I was going to use greater than or less than signs, this is what it would look like. This is our smallest, this is our biggest. To see those guys as fractions, this one would be 1 out of 1,000. This one would be 1 out of 100. And this one would be 1 out of 10. So it's a little easier to see now that clearly this one is the smallest compared to this one. Now, if you get an example like this, where some of your numbers are decimals and some are fractions, the first thing you need to do is make them all the same. No guessing. So figure out if you want to compare fractions or compare decimals. It doesn't matter. This time, I'm going to turn this fraction into a decimal just because that's a little bit less work. So 99 out of 1,000, I'm not going to look at it like that. I'm going to say that I have 99 out of 1,000 pieces. My last digit needs to be in the thousands place. So I'm going to write 99. But if I put a decimal right here, that would be 99 out of 100 pieces. So I need to add a 0 as a placeholder, and there's my decimal point. That would be 99 out of 1,000 pieces. So now I have 21 out of 1,000 pieces, or 21 thousandths. I have 845 pieces out of 1,000, or 845 thousandths, and 99 pieces out of 1,000, or 99 thousandths. So when you write it like this, it is much easier to see that this number, 845 thousandths, is our biggest, followed by 99 thousandths, and then 21 thousandths. So the directions say to order from least to greatest. This guy would be our smallest, so we would write 0.021. Sorry about the bad handwriting. And then the next smallest would be 0.099, 99 thousandths, followed by our biggest number, 845 thousandths. There's our biggest. So we're going from least to greatest. So remember, if you have a mixture of decimals and fractions, the first thing you need to do is make them all the same. It will be much more difficult to compare them. Okay, so let's look at our homework. So you can pause the video for just a second and grab workbook page 9 so that we can go through a few examples together. Okay, if you have your homework, we're going to look at the directions. We're not going to do too many together because I think you probably are going to do very well on this. If you look at the first section, 1 through 6, it says to write the decimal either as a fraction or a mixed number. We know that it will become a mixed number if you have a digit to the left of the decimal point. So the first mixed number you should get would be number 5. Let's do that one together. So number 5 is 3.020. So let's write that down. 3.020. We know if we have a decimal with a number to the left of the decimal point, that is our whole number. And this tells me that I have 20 out of 1,000 pieces. So I'm going to write 20 over 1,000. Now some of you might be thinking, Miss Bogner, you're wasting time, because we could simplify that fraction. And also, when we look at decimals, we know that a 0 to the right of the decimal point, this guy right here, doesn't matter, and as long as there's no digits after it. So you could also look at this as being 3.02, 3 and 200ths, which would be the mixed number 3 and 2 over 100. And both of those answers would be right. Those are equivalent fractions. So that's how you're going to do numbers 1 through 6. Numbers 7 through 12, you're going to take the fraction and turn them into a decimal. So let's just do number 11, 5 out of 1,000. So we have 5 out of 1,000. We're going to turn this guy into a decimal. So we have no whole number. It's not a mixed number, which means we will have no numbers to the left of our decimal point. So there's our decimal. We know we have 5 out of 1,000 pieces, meaning that our digit 5 needs to end up in the thousands place. So in order to do that, we need to add a 0 as a placeholder in the hundredths place, as well as a 0 as a placeholder in the tenths place. So 5 out of 1,000, we end up with 5 thousandths. All right, 13 and 14, you need to put the numbers in order, and number 14 should look very familiar. 21 thousandths, 845 thousandths, and 99 thousandths. If you remember, we just did that one as an example. And remember, I had you turn the fraction into a decimal and then compare them. So there's that guy. We have a question that has to do with looking at this model, which is much like the one I showed you on the computer screen. We have a multiple choice question that's a story problem. Make sure you use your brain on that one and think about why they added those extra zeros. And then finally, number 17 goes back to yesterday when we talked about how we can divide to figure out the actual value of a decimal. If you're having trouble with that one, get your book out and look back at section 9.8. So good luck on your homework. I know you'll do fine.